You know why they do that? I don't know why they do that. But you're back for more punishment, and so we have Catholic horror. Don't you miss Catholic horror? Remember the great days of Catholic horror? The 70s. You could make anything in the 70s. But in this case, it was Michael Winner trying to cash in on the success of the three great religious horror movies of the 60s and 70s. Rosemary's Baby, followed by The Exorcist, followed by The Omen, which created this whole genre that everybody wanted to cash in on. And so the formula of the day was make it full of creepy Catholic priests and secret rituals of ancient origin. And by the way, I forgot to ask this too. How many watched Dinners of Death? That's not nearly enough. So the rest of you have to leave. And how many are you planning to watch A Very Joe Bob Christmas next? All right, everybody can stay now. All right. Michael Winner. Does anybody know who Michael Winner is? He's a very odd duck. He had an extensive career in London directing crime stories and swinging London movies. You remember those swinging London movies with Twiggy, going through Carnaby Street and all that? They all starred Oliver Reed, if you remember those. And then he got his big American break with Charles Bronson. He linked up with Charles Bronson, and his most famous movie, of course, is Death Wish with Charles Bronson. Now, once he made Death Wish with Charles Bronson, he could pretty much, write his own ticket in America. So he turned down the French Connection. That was boring to him. And he stayed in the exploitation world for his entire career in America. So he made Scream for Help. He made The Wicked Lady, if you remember that. As late as 1993, he was still making rape revenge flicks. You remember Dirty Weekend? Anybody see Dirty Weekend? He was a very wealthy man. So it was not clear exactly why he was over in America making cheap exploitation films, because he didn't need to. He was one of the richest men in England. Very well-known media personality in the UK. Now, after 2000, he pretty much stopped making movies, and he became a snarky restaurant critic in London. He had a column in the Sunday Times of London. It was called Winter's Dinners. And unfortunately, he ate a bad oyster on a trip to Barbados in 2007, and they had to life flight him back to England, where he underwent 19 operations. And then a few years after that, he contracted E. coli from a serving of steak tartare. I'm not making any of this stuff up. Could I make this up? I couldn't make this up. And the doctors gave him 18 months to live because of his bad liver, and so he held dinner parties every week until he finally died in 2013. Now, I just tell this little, thumbnail biography of Michael Winner to indicate we're not dealing with a normal person here. So, if you ask people who worked on this movie, The Sentinel, they will tell you it couldn't have happened to a nicer guy, that he died from eating steak tartare. He was not a popular director. He was one of the most unpopular directors ever to work in the field of film, much less in exploitation film. The male lead of this movie, Chris Sarandon, said he was a, quote, terrible human being who spent the entire shoot making fun of the little people he had hired and making life miserable for everybody else. Sarandon and his co-star, Christina Rains, both call it the worst experience they have ever had in film. Apparently, he was so mean to Christina in so many ways that all the other actors wanted to protect her and sort of moved in to sort of be a shield against him. I never met Michael Winner, so I can't really say what it was about him that made people dislike him for forever after they met him. But in the case of this film, he created the darkest, most disturbing, in my opinion, most disturbing of all the Catholic horror films of the 60s and 70s. There is something so unsettling and shocking about this film that it stays with you, and it never goes exactly where you think it's going to go. How many of you have seen it? Has anybody seen it?
Did you want to
Just 5 or 6. Well, that's good. You're in for an experience tonight. I'm going to give you a few notes about it before we get started. Michael Winner didn't want Chris Sarandon for the male lead. He wanted either Christopher Walken or Martin Sheen, but the studio wouldn't let him use either Christopher Walken or Martin Sheen. Christopher Walken would have been great in this role. Christopher Walken is in the movie. He's the assistant detective, and I'm not sure he ever even speaks in the movie. I think he says 4 or 5 words. But it's weird to see Christopher Walken just sort of standing there in the background in the movie, emoting, because you tend to watch Christopher Walken even when he's not in the scene, you know, and so you watch his face even when he's not actively a part of the movie. And that's one of the weird things about the scene, about this movie throughout the movie. It's full of movie stars, but these are movie stars who all took very minor roles. Now, part of that is because Michael Winner is such a big deal international celebrity, and he was a gossip columnist too, and he did all kinds of things, that he was friends with all these famous international movie stars, so he could just ask them to come be in his little movie. Well, he started out his career in England. He was a gossip columnist at the age of 16, and he got to know all these people. So, for example, Ava Gardner has a tiny role as a real estate agent. Ava Gardner and Christina Rains got to know each other during the filming, and Christina noticed that Michael Winner was intentionally giving Ava Gardner bad lighting to make her look old and creepy. And so Christina steps in and she works with a cinematographer to secretly change the lighting so that she looked better. And her rationale was that Ava was still a great-looking woman, even at the age of 55, and Michael was being mean to her. But I kind of disagree with this female plot against Michael Winner in this case, because the character that Ava is playing is up to no good. She's not what she seems, you know, and who knows where she really came from, you know. It would have made good artistic sense to creep her up a little bit, but that's an example of actors thinking that they know more than they do about the story that they're making. But listen to all the famous people that are in the movie. Ava Gardner plays Miss Logan, the realtor. Martin Balsam plays Professor Rudzinski, another small role. John Carradine plays Father Halloran. Jose Ferrer, he's just robed figure. Jose Ferrer is robed figure. Arthur Kennedy is the Monsignor. Burgess Meredith plays Charles Chasen. Sylvia Miles plays a character called Gerda. Eli Wallach is the detective. Christopher Walken is the assistant detective. Jerry Orbach plays a character named Michael Dayton. Beverly D'Angelo plays Sandra the lesbian. And man, does she have a memorable scene. You've never seen a scene. You've never seen Beverly D'Angelo until you've seen this scene. Tom Berenger is in the movie. William Hickey is in the movie. Jeff Goldblum gets 30th billing in the movie. Richard Dreyfuss has a bit part in the movie. But the 2 stars of the movie are Chris Sarandon and Christina Rains. Chris Sarandon burst into view in Dog Day Afternoon. He was the transsexual wife of Al Pacino, if you've seen that movie. He also played the psychotic rapist in Lipstick, and that's why it's a little strange that he comes off as such a straight arrow attorney in this movie. He's from West Virginia. He got a fine arts degree at Catholic University. Good for this movie. He went straight to New York after graduation, started working in the Guiding Light soap opera, and he was kind of at the height of his fame when this movie was made. But he said it was such an awful experience that he actually quit the business after this movie was made. 6 months later, he reconsidered and has had a long and varied career since then. Lives in New York, does a lot of theater. And then there's Christina Rains. Now, Christina Reigns is kind of forgotten today. Not many people talk about her. Most people remember her for a supporting role in The Duelists, which came out right before this movie and was Ridley Scott's first film. That was his debut film. She was the love interest of Keith Carradine in The Duelists, and she was the love interest of Keith Carradine in real life for about 8 years. They lived together in Topanga Canyon. Those familiar with Southern California will know that's the hippie part of LA, which I mentioned because some of you will remember a horror anthology film from 1983 called Nightmares, and Christina Rains stars in one of the stories in Nightmares called Terror in Topanga. So it's all very incestuous. How ironic. This crowd might also remember Stacy. Does anybody remember Stacy, the first movie of Andy Sedaris? the great late Andy Sedaris, made in 1973. Anne Randall was the lead in that movie as the private detective, but Christina was the second female lead. And then there's a movie where she met Keith Carradine called Hex, the horror biker western rape revenge classic Hex. You may have seen that, probably no. Also starred Gary Busey and Scott Glenn. She was in Russian Roulette, a thriller with George Segal. She was Mary in Robert Altman's Nashville. There were like 30 stars in that movie. She was Mary in the folk group Bill, Mary, and Tom, having an affair with Tom, but married to Bill. And Tom was Keith Carradine. So she was in every Keith Carradine movie, is basically what I'm trying to tell you. Christina Reigns has kind of an exotic look. She was born in Manila, but she's all American. She grew up all over the world. Her father was an engineer for Procter & Gamble, which is why she traveled all over the world. Went to high school in Connecticut, went to college at the Chandler School for Women in Boston, and she became an Eileen Ford model and just kind of stumbled into acting. So basically a model. She had worked with Michael Winner once before, which is strange because she hated him so much, on a Charles Bronson film called The Stone Killer, but her part was cut from that movie. So she kind of knew what she was getting into. In the 80s, she did a lot of TV movies, a lot of episodic TV guest roles. She was the lead in Flamingo Road, big-time soap opera that lasted 2 seasons. She was the one opposite Morgan Fairchild in that. And during that experience, she fell in love with another one of her co-stars, Mark Harmon, and had a long relationship with him. One other role I should mention is the Italian miniseries Quo Vadis. She played the scheming Poppaea, the wife of Nero. And Poppaea is, of course, one of the great roles for women. Bridget Bardot played Poppaea, Theda Bara played Poppaea, and the most memorable was, of course, Claudette Colbert in the D.W. Griffith Sign of the Cross, classic movie. When you make a religious movie, see, we're talking about religious horror today. When you make a religious movie, all the best roles are either nymphomaniacs or serial killers. And Christina Reigns was right up there with Claudette Colbert in her Poppaea role for that Italian miniseries. She eventually settled down, married a screenwriter, Christopher Crowe, the guy who wrote the horror anthology Nightmares that I mentioned before. He also wrote The Last of the Mohicans, a lot of episodic TV. And then in the 90s, she retired from the business to raise a daughter, and today she's a registered nurse who works with kidney patients. So she ranks this as the worst film experience that she ever had. She said Michael Winner was unkind, he was scary. She never watched the completed film because of her bad experiences making the film. The film was actually based on a novel by Jeffrey Konvitz, who is Jewish. He's not Catholic. Basically a producer. He produced Silent Night, Bloody Night. Not Silent Night, Deadly Night. Silent Night, Bloody Night, 1974. And the novel of the Sentinel went to #2 on the New York Times mass market list. So Universal Pictures was hoping that this would turn into a blockbuster like The Exorcist. Of course, Konvitz and Winner fought the whole time because Winner wanted to make so many changes in the script. He made so many changes that he ended up with a co-screenwriting credit. And but here's the most controversial thing. Of all the bad things that Michael Winner did, the most controversial was when the denizens of the underworld show up in the movie, basically zombies. They don't call them zombies, but they're denizens of the underworld. He decided to save money on special effects makeup by just finding naturally deformed people. Then when the cast and crew broke for lunch, everybody refused to eat at the same table with the deformed extras because they didn't think they could, digest their food while they were looking into the face of these incredibly, massively deformed people. So they had to put up a curtain between the people working on the film and the physically handicapped people, which is kind of sick, right? Not exactly Todd Browning making this film. But this movie shows a Roman Catholic Church that's ultimately protecting the world from the gates of hell, but it seems really, really evil. It seems like a really, really evil movie. I think that's what makes the film so intriguing and the reason that it's still watched today. It was filmed entirely on location in a brownstone in Brooklyn. Ava Gardner quotes the rent as $500 a month. So Christina Rains says, "Oh, that's too much." So instantly the price goes down to $400. You know, which I think she probably could have said, by the way, the gates of hell are here, and anybody today would still take that deal anyway in Brooklyn. But after the movie, I'll be out in the lobby. We can discuss the ending and you know, try to figure out what Michael Winner was ultimately going for with this movie. Okay, I'm going to do the drive-in totals now, and we'll get started. 3 dead bodies, 25 undead bodies, 42 breasts, 18 beasts, ominous Catholic clergy, 1 suddenly dead daddy with I can't go to the burial migraine and flashbacks to an awkward orgy with cake eating, face slapping, cross necklace ripping, and slashed wrists. Damn. And that's just in the first 11 minutes of the film. 1 too good to be true apartment, 1 blind priest, sudden fainting, inappropriate masturbation with orgasm, lesbian fondling, 1 cat birthday party with polka dancing, 1 nightmare with symbols, suddenly non-existent neighbors, 1 dead parakeet, 1 psychotic break with dead dad stabbing, 1 unexpected murder investigation, Catholicism as a cure-all, sudden Latin reading, church breaking and entering. That's got to be a sin, right? Breaking and entering into a church. Old priest strangling, suicide encouraging, night foo, religious statue foo, and Drive-In Academy Award nominations for Ava Gardner as the real estate agent Miss Logan for declaring, I find New Yorkers have no sense for anything but sex and money. Sylvia Miles and Beverly D'Angelo as the lesbians Gerda and Sandra for knowing how to show a neighbor a good time and for saying it's rather rude to eat and run. Chris Sarandon as Michael for being stuck with all the exposition in the movie. Christina Rains as the poor put upon Allison who has to faint constantly, and Burgess Meredith for stealing the movie as wacky neighbor Charles Chazen, and who keeps saying friendships can blossom into bliss. 4 stars. Joe Bob says check it out.